Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The millionaire Brexit campaigner Arron Banks has confirmed that he will appear before MPs this week to answer new allegations about his links with Russia. It's being reported in the Sunday Times today that he had more meetings with Russian officials than previously disclosed. This new information has raised fresh questions about whether the Kremlin sought to influence the outcome of the EU referendum in 2016.
And that story about the bad boys of Brexit being exceedingly naughty with Russians is on most front pages, or many front pages. There, the Sunday Times revealed Brexit backers' golden Kremlin connection. That's a reference to gold mines. The Mail on Sunday has Brexit, new secret Putin connection, it says. And then there's the Observer. Top Brexit funder had multiple meetings with Russian officials. Of course, he had every right to do that. We'll talk about that shortly. There's the Sunday Express and the other big story of the day, which is, of course, Brexit generally. Theresa May savaging the Lords over Brexit, behaving improperly and unconstitutionally, she says. And then there's the Telegraph. All the papers, again, I should say, have pictures of the royal family out on the Buckingham Street, Buckingham Palace balcony, and the youngest royals behaving a little bit cheekily. Back May or Corbyn will get in, the rebels are told. The great threat hanging over the Conservative Party at the moment. So much to talk about. Shall we start with Theresa May and Brexit and the week ahead? Fraser.
Yeah, well, we've got the so-called Super Tuesday coming up with all of these votes on the Brexit legislation.
It's 14 big votes and it goes on all day and all night, pretty much.
But the consensus is that it won't really damage her because of the reasons the Sunday Telegraph says, that you really want to destabilise her. Even Amber Rudd, a big leading light in the Remain campaign, is saying to her party, you've got to back Theresa May here. Implication, you can ditch her later on because Jeremy Corbyn's the bigger threat. So for all of the votes, I don't think the parliamentary drama, the political drama, isn't going to be nearly as great on Tuesday as we suspect.
Kate McCann, you're watching this day in, day out in the lobby in the House of Commons. Do you agree with that she's going to win these votes?
I think so. This really is one for the political geeks, I think, because actually on the face of it, it's not really about these votes at all. It's about the calculations going on in the Conservative Party behind the scenes. And there's a really telling line in this Observer story. There's a quote here from a Tory saying it's a political calculation. And actually what they're talking about is that there are lots of Tory rebels who might want to back these amendments, but they don't want to do it now because they think if they do, they could destabilise the Prime Minister and you might end up having a leadership contest before they're really ready for it.
So back to the old story, which is that Tory hardcore Remainers are terrified of a Brexiteer taking over from Theresa May and vice versa. Yeah. Both sides think we're not absolutely sure about her, but we could get somebody much worse. Yeah. So sit in our hands. Yeah.
But then, of course, the bigger threat is cabinet resignations. I mean, the Sunday Times has got a very detailed story about she almost had 2 cabinet resignations last week. She could get others quitting. If the Brexiteers think she's about to sell them out with a deal that they couldn't count on.
So this is the threat. So David Davis went in and we're told didn't actually say I'm going to resign unless, but nonetheless his demeanour was slightly menacing, as it can be from time to time. The implication here is that there's some kind of informal agreement among the leading Brexiteers that if one goes, they all go.
Yes, and they wanted a fig leaf, and they were given a fig leaf of this date. You know, we're going to be out of the EU, but not institutions by this certain date. But you get the feeling that that's going to be rejected by the EU and that the resignation has been averted, in fact, down the line, but it still will come. The only question is when.
And this talk of a meltdown in the talks, certainly the rhetoric is getting harder and harder on the European side of the argument. Are we going to see a sort of punchier Theresa May, do you think, coming up to this summit?
Well, that's what Boris Johnson has told us in his leaked tape last Tuesday, that there's going to be a Theresa May playing hardball, there's going to be a meltdown. I'm not quite so sure, though. I mean, the British position seems to get weaker every time it's rejected by the EU, and I think we are heading towards a kind of compromise which most Tory MPs, I think, would actually back, where we would actually stay in the single market for goods, perhaps not services, but it'll be something in order just to get this off the political agenda.
You think they would actually swallow staying inside the single market in some respects?
I think there'll be something along those lines.
Fascinating.
Now, I think most Tory MPs would back that, by no means all, but remember, she needs to get this past Parliament. She needs all of her party to back it, because if they don't, then it's no deal.
So in the unsatisfactory jargon of all of this, we are heading towards a soft Brexit.
I don't know if you can call it a soft Brexit, but it certainly will be a Brexit, which I suspect would satisfy most of the people who voted for Brexit. But the big question the Tories are grappling with is, would that lead to uproar and us being kicked out of office? David Davis is talking about the worst defeat since 1997 if they were to compromise in that way. They just don't know.
You just don't know. Helen, I want to come on to the other big political story with you, if I may, which is the long and rather tangled story of leaked emails and correspondence between Isabel Oakeshott on the one hand, Arron Banks, who did the unofficial, very successful, very punchy Leave.eu campaign.
It's a story with everything. There's Stalin's vodka, there's personalised number plates that say ex-MI5 spy, there's gold mines. But to sum it up, Arron Banks is a big donor to UKIP and also a big donor to Leave.eu, which is the unofficial kind of grassroots, Nigel Farage-backed campaign, not Vote Leave, the official campaign.
But the biggest donor to British politics in British political history, is that right?
Yeah, which came about basically because I think he felt snubbed by William Hague, who said, who is this guy? And he said, well, I'll show him who he is, and started giving huge amounts of money to UKIP, and then poured, I think, 8 million into Leave. What we found out from these emails is that he had more meetings with either the Russian ambassador or Russian contacts than he'd previously revealed. So I think he calls him some dodgy bloke called Oleg came up to him. And what happens when you meet a dodgy bloke called Oleg? You agree to have lunch with him. Of course you do.
Obviously you do. And originally, in classic Arron Banks style, he said he could only remember one boozy lunch with the Russian ambassador.
Well, it lasted for 6 hours, so I'm not surprised he can't remember very much of it. But, I mean, there's, what we know about Russia's kind of foreign policy is that it wants to kick up a huge amount of dust around stuff. It's this kind of policy of info smog. So whether or not there is anything that is criminal or unethical about this, we know certainly that Russia was very much in favour of Brexit. They saw it as something that was very destabilising. In the same way they were very much in favour of the election of Donald Trump, because they saw it as destabilising the kind of liberal rules-based world order. And
quite extraordinarily, it's revealed that the Russian ambassador, on behalf of Putin, no doubt, went to Banks and Co. and said, do you by any chance have the mobile numbers of the Trump team?
Yeah. And I think this was the main
channel to Trump.
This was the main value to them. They might not have got anything Brexit-wise, but they got some mobile phone numbers at the end after discussing and dangling all of these strange gold mine deals. So I think this tells us more about how Russia operates and seeks to influence MPs than it does about the Brexit campaign and how it played out.
Can I ask about the origins of this story? Because it's very interesting. We had Carol Cadwallader of The Observer, whose name is on the byline of The Observer story here, and we had Isabel Oakeshott, whose emails these originally were, apparently gathering dust in her attic, she said, for a while. And what appears to be a classic piece of journalistic skullduggery on both sides. So
Isabel Oakeshott says she has these emails kind of gathering dust from when she wrote a book with Arron Banks called The Bad Boys of Brexit, but she hadn't looked at this, they'd been kind of gathering dust. And then Carol Cadwallader of The Observer, as I think it's been fair to say, as well as writing articles, has been exchanging lively Twitter conversations with Arron Banks for some time. So at that point, it seems The Observer got hold of these emails and then kind of in a classic, as you say, newspaper skullduggery, decided, well, if they're coming out, then let's have the Sunday Times might as well put them out as well.
That's why they're on both front pages.
And tweeted about last night before the front pages.
Yeah, Kate, the government says this is nothing to do with us, all this stuff. This is the unofficial campaign. Our finger marks are nowhere near this, and that's true. But is it absolutely nothing to do with the government, do you think?
Well, I think we'll find out in the coming days exactly how much it is to do. But I think what this does highlight is, as Fraser says, what Russia really does seek to do is to try and use back channels and people that are willing to speak to them. I think Isabel Oakeshott in the paper calling these two, willful idiots today, people that are happy to go to these lunches and talk and exchange phone numbers so that they can do diplomacy.
I guess my point is, here we have Theresa May at the summit, attacking the Russians for this, that and the other, having a really bad time with Putin at the moment. And back home it's revealed that one of the two campaigns that delivered the verdict in the referendum, which she is now implementing, had Russian influence.
Yeah, and there is a wider point here actually about the G7, which is that when Trump walks out of that summit early and it ends in a way that lots of other people don't want it, at the summit don't want it to end, that doesn't look good for the West in terms of its relations with Russia, because what Russia wants to see is people disagreeing. France and the UK, and for them, if that group of people, the G7, is united, that's a bad thing. So when Trump walks out, that actually is quite a good thing.
I think it's an extraordinary moment in world politics. You're seeing nothing less than the remaking of basically the world order, right? Which is that Trump now is much more at home with authoritarians. He loves dictators because, you know what, he can do kind of weird masculine photo opportunities with them. He likes talking to Kim, as we know, he likes talking to Putin.
He doesn't like talking to Theresa May.
And Emmanuel Macron and Angela Merkel, who say things like, well, rules have to be obeyed. Sometimes you can't just kind of make a deal on the back of an envelope. We have all these systems in place.
This has been, in truth, a very important and extraordinary summit, hasn't it? I mean, we've had Donald Trump going into it threatening a trade war, and that threat is still on the table despite everything that's said, and now he's off, of course, to see Kim Jong-un.
I think it's important for what it symbolises. I mean, G7 summits tend to be an opportunity for protocols rather than great agreements. And what a photograph we've got today, the Sunday Telegraph shows. It just you could have, cartoonists could have done this to demonstrate the nature of world relations. Here you've got Donald Trump, arms folded, intransigent. I don't care. I'm going to give you all of our tariffs. And everybody you've got, Japanese, the German, Canadians, all trying to talk him out of it. But he doesn't care. If anything, he revels in the kind of
the body language is so fantastic there. Angela Merkel leaning forward across the table like the kind of silverback ape in charge of the thing, and Trump sitting there with his arms crossed saying no with every bodily action he can bring himself up.
Yeah, and this, looking at this photograph, you can pretty much tell all you need to know, really, about the status of trade negotiations in the G7. And perhaps this is why Donald Trump wanted to leave early, because he realised it would just be this for 2 solid days.
Well, let's talk finally about where he's going next, Kate McCann, because you've got the New York Times there on your glossy tablet.
Exactly, and this week this will be one of the most fascinating things to watch. And I think actually what Fraser's saying is really interesting. Look at this picture again, look at Donald Trump sat down. He's sat down and everybody else has stood up. What will come out of this meeting, I think, this week, is we'll be able to see Trump. I mean, he said going up to it, well, I'll know instantly because I'll make a judgment when I meet this guy. I'll know. And someone said, well, how will you know whether it's going to work or not? And he said, oh, just touch, just the feel of it.
It's that New York property developers instinct coming through.
And actually, lots of people have lots of things to say about Donald Trump and his style of diplomacy. And you can make all those comments on that. But at the same time, there's something about world leaders. Maybe Donald Trump's way of interacting with these people actually could get things done. And if you leave the policy to the people around him, maybe. I mean, maybe I'm being overly optimistic.
Like if you believe that, I've got a bridge to sell you. I think what will happen is that Kim Jong-un will love bomb him. There'll be some weird photo opportunity, probably with fireworks going on in the background. He'll have a massive military parade, and then absolutely nothing will get decided.
Lots of fabulous hair. On that, I'm afraid we have to leave it for now. Thank you very much indeed. It's a busy, busy morning.
Time now for a look through the Sunday papers, and joining us to do that this week is the Sun's Westminster editor, Harry Cole, and the author and former Labour advisor, Ayesha Hazarika. Thanks for being here so early on a Sunday morning. Appreciate it. Lots to get through this morning. I mean, the G7 feels like that's the obvious place to start. Donald Trump's second snub to May in just 48 hours, according to the Mail on Sunday. I mean, those not quite the headlines that any political leader would want.
But then who would want to be his friend at that summit? It was the greatest... I can't remember a summit quite like it. Normally, these things are stitched up weeks in advance. Everything's agreed before it's ever going to happen, and it's a complete, PR exercise, and they all shake hands and have a lovely time. This was just amazing. Like, Donald Trump is basically an international hand grenade. He's just come in there and he's blown everything up, and he's completely rearranged the normal way of doing things. Most leaders will never actually see the final communique. That will all be done by these things called Sherpas, and they'll all agree. They're sitting in the breakfast table, arguing it out, sort of mano a mano, and then Angela Merkel laying down the law and Theresa May on the fringes. It was just an extraordinary sort of geopolitical moment of the likes of which you'd never expect to see. But
and does part of you admire him for doing this, for just ripping up the rule book?
I mean, look, he definitely does it his own way, and we're almost living in a post-protocol kind of environment with Donald Trump. And I think what we all forget is that before Donald Trump was leader of the free world, he was actually a fantastic television man. He was a great TV producer. And I think that's what he's doing now. He's basically controlling the newsrooms of the world. He's almost like a reality TV show in politics now. So he's going into the G7. He throws his, as Harry says, this hand grenade of a trade tariff war. So, you can imagine the teaser sting. Will there be a trade war or not? Tune into the G7 to find out.
And episode 2 is episode 400, whatever it is coming up on Tuesday, when he takes the greatest show on earth to Singapore, and he goes and sits down with Kim Jong, apparently, if they make it into the room. And then, guess where it's coming next? It's coming to England.
It's going to be absolutely massive. But the one thing that's also interesting, if I'm Theresa May, I would actually see his snub as a badge of honour, because he doesn't get on particularly well with strong women, let's be honest. He wouldn't shake Angela Merkel's hand, famously, at one of the very first meetings that they had. Trump is an alpha, and he likes dealing with strong men. He loves President Xi. He's got this weird thing about sort of putting Kim Jong-un. So I think, if I was Theresa May, I wouldn't fret about that too much. But the serious thing she should be fretting about is this very capricious, emotionally driven man-toddler who is now in charge of the United States of America, we're going to have to try and get a trade deal with him post-Brexit, and who knows what mood he'll be in.
But that's the point, isn't it? Because, OK, look, if they're at university together, Theresa May and Donald Trump will probably not be best friends, OK? But at the same time, doesn't she have to play the game a bit in order to get a trade deal?
Well, I think, I mean, she's approached this in two different ways, really. First of all, it was get on the plane, be the first person to meet him, and then the weird handshaking, hand-holding picture. And now she's, I think, playing a slightly different tactic, which is kind of step back a little bit and let him sort of, you know, the circular firing squad sort of escape you. And then you end up with headlines like, oh, well, I wasn't snubbed, and Donald Trump didn't name her in her top 3 leaders of who he got on with at the conference. But the people he did name, he ended up 5 minutes later going on Twitter and calling feeble and weak. So I don't think it's a complete disaster, and it could have been a lot worse, but she kind of can't win with him.
And it's quite hard to play a game with him. I mean, look at Macron. Macron came and he had this, just there's two of us, you know, the bromance, kind of, the handshake.
The pressure point.
But then, you know, they don't see eye to eye. You know, Macron, for all the, hey, you know, we've got this amazing relationship. Macron couldn't convince Trump to get, for example, back on board with the climate change agreement that he walked away from. He couldn't dissuade Donald Trump from escalating this trade war. So you are dealing with somebody who, let's be honest, does politics and makes decisions literally in the moment, in the heat of the moment,
he said
depending on what mood he's in, and that's very worrying.
He tell whether he can do a deal with Kim within the first 2 minutes of meeting.
Oh yeah.
So I'm glad that's all
yeah, that's all sorted out
soon. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, not long to wait.
It is literally like dealing with the toddler. It's like, does he need a snack? Is he a bit tired? Like, it could go either way.
But then also the other way, if you look at it, is how is this going to play to his domestic audience, and how is this going to play to his voters who actually have been screaming out for change, and it's certainly changed. It's blowing up the New World Order. So you've got to, if you are looking through the prism of TV, you'll be looking at the midterms and looking at who he's trying to.
And his popularity ratings are quite high.
They are up, and
Obama
yeah, well, he remains very popular with his constituents, his Rust Belt, and Harry is right. He always thinks about pivoting everything back through the promises he made during his election campaign, which he's trying to show that he can put a big tick against, and he's trying to show his people back home, you know what, I am the main man on the world stage now. You know, I say something, the world follows, and there's a certain amount of truth in that. You know, from what's happened in Jerusalem to the trade wars now, the Iran deal. But the irony will be a lot of the measures that he is taking could actually have very severe consequences for them. A trade war ultimately is not good for people on low and middle wages. A lot of jobs could be put at risk.
I think people will be surprised to learn that Canada puts 300% tariffs on American dairy goods, and we'll think, actually, maybe he's got a point there. Everyone cries, oh, Trump can't start a trade war, but actually what he was saying is, you guys are already doing it to me, so why should the American public be paying for the pleasure?
If he wants to completely rewrite, you know, all the global rules on trade, then that's one thing. He picks and just he chooses. He gives it the big one about let's have free trade and let's not have any tariffs, and then he sort of kicks off.
But
a
you'll
trade
notice
war.
that everyone immediately went, oh God, when he suggested a G7 free trade zone, which if you're looking for something post-Brexit, that sounds quite appealing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's talk about Brexit, shall we?
Sorry. You mentioned it.
Sorry,
the B word.
Doing so well.
Such a nice time.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to have to bring it back to Brexit, guys. I'm sorry. Because we've got this big vote next week, it feels like, of course, we need to talk about it, don't we? Brexit bill coming back to the House of Commons. We're looking here at the Daily Telegraph. Theresa May could be left reliant on Labour to defeat Brexit amendments. As someone who's advised multiple Labour politicians, Ayesha, aren't Labour missing a bit of a trick here?
This is a really, really tricky issue for the Labour Party, and the Labour Party is very, very divided on it. The majority of Labour members are very, very pro staying definitely within the EU and definitely within the single market, but the leadership has taken a different view. And I think that I think a lot of MPs are still really weighing up heavily about whether they should vote. I mean, they probably will vote for the Lords' amendment, which is to keep, essentially, Britain in the single market. And that is the thing that the Labour Party could have defeated Theresa May in.
Okay.
The problem that Corbyn has, and you have a couple of MPs, you have people like Caroline Flint, you have Gareth Snell, who have seats which were heavy Leave seats, and they're saying, look, we have to think about our constituents
big difference
as well.
between Labour members and Labour voters. There are a lot more Labour voters than there are members, and Labour voters, a lot of them want people to get on and and leave. I think this Tuesday vote is heading towards a bit of an anticlimax, because it feels like, reading the papers today, that a deal's been done. You've got key allies of Theresa May, Damien Green and Amber Rudd, out there saying, guys, come on. And if it was going to a knife edge, these people would be involved in that. These are two significant
Ian Duncan Smith and Amber Rudd.
I know, what an alliance that is.
It
feels like, once again, the can has been slightly kicked down the road, and the big row about customs has been put off again until the customs bill.
I'm going to have to stop you there. So much to get through. We had loads of other stories, but sadly, we've run out of time. We had too much fun with Donald Trump. Thanks,
no whatever.
Well, came out a bit wrong, maybe. Thank you both very much.
There's no shortage of stories for us to discuss this morning. We'll be talking later about claims across today's front pages of links between a high-profile Leave campaigner and Russian officials during the EU referendum. We'll be joined by the chairman of the Select Committee investigating that. And, of course, we'll be talking about a week of intrigue and animosity at Westminster, as well as a few other big stories that have been affecting people right across the country. So let's take a look. The Brexit train trundled on through this week, and it has taken all of Theresa May's skills to prevent a derailment. But on Monday, the actual trains were the priority. Amid new timetable chaos, the Transport Secretary could only apologise.
I'm extremely sorry for the levels of disruption that passengers are experiencing.
The Northern press was damning, as was the Commons.
Isn't it about time he step aside?
This whole thing is an absolute disaster.
Grayling hoped for a softer landing after announcing the final plan for Heathrow's third runway. And to complete the planes, trains and automobiles headache, petrol prices saw the highest rise in 18 years. But it's still Brexit that's setting the pace for this government. Rumours swirled that Brexit Secretary David Davis threatened to quit if the Prime Minister refused to change her proposal to fix the customs conundrum. Allies highlighted his toughness as he demanded a time limit on the backstop, the UK's backup plan for avoiding a hard Irish border.
Are you going to resign, Mr. Davis?
Crunch meeting won, but he left without a deal. Called back to Downing Street again, and he walked away with a date. But just when you think one cabinet row is quelled, in a leaked recording, the Foreign Secretary gave his frank assessment of current negotiating tactics.
Imagine Trump was doing Brexit. What would he do? He'd go in bloody hard.
And when Brussels did react to the backstop proposal, it did not make the way forward any clearer.
Backstop means backstop.
Leaders from the G7 fell out over Russia, thanks to President Trump, and for Theresa May, Brexit was never far away.
Of course these are complex negotiations. It's not easy.
It's not getting any easier. The timetable is tight, and Theresa May needs to make sure the wheels don't fall off. So let's unpick some of that and look towards the week ahead with our panel of expert insiders. Tom, how bad a week was it for the Prime Minister? How close did she come to actually losing maybe not one but more cabinet ministers?
Well, on Thursday we got incredibly overexcited. All of us, the Westminster bubble, went into a record-breaking frenzy fest of excitement because we've, in fairness to us, and every now and then we have to be a little bit fair to excitable Westminster journalists, for 18 months now we've been expecting this great big huge row to break out into the open, for the cabinet to split, for there to be resignation, simply because Theresa May, we've all thought, cannot carry everybody through this entire Brexit process. And so every now and then there's a flash of this and we think, is it going to be now, is it not? And we all thought it was going to be Thursday, with David Davis walking out, maybe taking much of his Brexit ministry with him, potentially also Boris Johnson and Liam Fox, although I hear Liam Fox wants Boris Johnson's job, so he wants to hang around. It didn't happen, and in my view it didn't happen because David Davis blinked and the Brexiteers blinked. They looked over the precipice, they realised, oddly, Theresa May actually has the support in the House of Commons amongst the Tory backbenchers, so resigning would not have done her in, so it would have been a waste of time.
Is that how you read what happened?
Absolutely. David Davis bottled it. Forget the SAS nonsense. When it came to the crunch, he didn't dare. And
he did get the Prime Minister to write a new line into the paper, though, saying that they expect to leave by the end of 21. So people were interpreting that as her having blinked, but is the promise worth very much?
It was less of a blink. I think expecting has no legal force whatever. None of this has any legal force. It's going to be blown out of the water by Brussels anyway. But I think what's interesting is the reason why the Brexiters blinked this time is that they sense that the mood is really changing. As people realise, as increasing numbers of MPs who are essentially Brexiters look at day after day what it means in Dover, what it means for every industry, things in their own constituencies, they're suddenly saying, you know what, we need a soft Brexit, not a hard Brexit. And the hard Brexiters are on the back foot.
Really, Julia?
I've said the people who lost out last week were the 52% of people who voted for a particular policy, that someone became Tory leader and became Prime Minister on the basis that she would deliver. And it seems that every time there is some sort of fundamental clash between Remain and Leave within the Cabinet, it's Remain that ends up winning. Yeah, I absolutely think that David Davis blinked, and I agree. It's very rare you and I agree on anything, Polly, but no doubt at all. The fudge absolutely has no legal meaning whatsoever, and it's already been blown out of the water by the European Union. No, the reality is that everyone in the Tory party is so scared of having a Tory leadership contest, so scared of having being forced somehow into a general election and Jeremy Corbyn winning, even though they're 7 points ahead in the polls right now, the Tories, that they're not willing to risk anything. But I have to say...
So will it hold? I mean, Theresa May's papered over the cracks for now. Will it last?
Yeah, and they'll win the votes over the EU withdrawal bill, the House of Lords 14 amendments. They'll win those next week. Everything will be... And yet again, as with everything to do with Brexit, they push the fudge and push it down the road further and further. At some point, we're either going to be leaving or we're not going to be leaving in a meaningful way. And it's all very well saying they want to protect themselves now. But remember, the Leave voters are going to punish the political party in government that doesn't deliver Brexit.
Long before that happens, there is another vote in July on the Trade and Customs Bill, both an EEA amendment and a Customs Union amendment put down by Anna Soubry and other Tory rebels. I don't think there'll be an eruption next week. I think the government will carry that because everybody has mutually agreed to suspend the fight for another month. But July, I think, really will be, although we keep on saying that really will be the volcano moment.
But we see both parties. We see the Tories and the Labour Party trying to formulate policies that can hold their parties together. None of them are actually acceptable to Brussels, are they?
No, I think that's true, but I think it's Theresa May has constructed a cabinet which was designed never to be able to agree. The idea that she could somehow bridge it, all they can do is fudge. But the great crunch will come, and it may be a fundamental split in the Tory party of a really earth-shattering kind. Labour's splits are a bit different. It's slightly more about how fast do we go, and whether we should be in the EEA or not. It's not huge. I mean, there's a big split.
It matters less when you're
not in government. There's a big split between Corbynistas and not, but on Europe,
a big split between the voters and the MPs.
Well, we'll be picking up on all of this throughout the programme, so stay with us. We'll be coming back to you all. Well, let's pick up now on a story that's across many of today's front pages, but it seems to have been the Observer and the Sunday Times that were on the scent first, and it concerns the connections between the high-profile Brexit campaigner Arron Banks and the Russian ambassador during the EU referendum campaign and afterwards. Now, of course, this will stoke claims that Russia in some way influenced that vote. Well, Arron Banks and his right-hand man will be asked about this when they appear in front of the Commons Culture Committee this week, and the chairman of that committee is Damien Collins, who is joining us now. Hi there. Now, you say you hadn't seen any of the emails that have been published so far. What was your response when you read them?
Well, this is big news. I think it's very relevant because if the Russian government is seeking to develop relationships with prominent people like Arron Banks, not just a wealthy businessman, but someone who's been the biggest private funder of political campaigns in this country, whose funding of Leave.eu played a central role in the build-up to the Brexit referendum and the referendum itself, I think we have a right to know what the level of that contact was, particularly when Mr Banks himself has sought to deny that. He said he only met the Russian ambassador on one occasion. We now know it was more than that. There were trips to Moscow, supposedly lucrative business deals offered. Did those business deals go through? Did Mr Banks profit from it? Was that money used in political campaigning? I think these are all important questions, and I think people will want to know the answer.
And he had been refusing to appear in front of your committee, but right at the end of last week, yesterday, he agreed that he will come and speak to you?
Well, he had agreed to come. Well, in fact, initially he asked to come. He then agreed to come. He then pulled out on Friday, citing a court case in Mississippi last week where evidence published by the Select Committee was used in the hearing. And then yesterday he said that he did want to come after all when it was clear that the Times and the Observer were going to publish their story. So we're looking forward to seeing him on Tuesday. I hope as well that if there are supposedly thousands of documents that Isabel Oakeshott has, and I think we would welcome seeing some of those documents if they can be supplied. They would certainly help our questioning of Mr. Banks. As of yet, we don't have those documents. But
you're hoping to try and get to the bottom of these Russian connections when you question them.
Yeah, we want to understand more about them, and from what's been published so far, to understand to what extent Mr. Banks profited from his relationship with the Russian embassy. But if there are thousands of documents that Isabel Oakeshott has gathered, then clearly there could be many more questions about subjects we don't yet know to come out. So I think that, we have a right to know the extent of his relationship with the Russian embassy.
Well, this is a big story this morning, so I know the panel are keen to talk to you about it as well. What are the real questions do you think that Arron Banks has to answer, Tom? What do people want to get to the bottom of here?
Well, at the moment, with these it's pretty interesting, extraordinary stories, there is enormous amounts of smoke, but very little fire. So Arron Banks is a reasonably cosmopolitan character. He has some very interesting friends and some slightly sort of suspect links, perhaps. But that doesn't necessarily mean he's done anything wrong at all. And I think even Damien would probably admit that there is no criminal suggestion here, there's no criminal evidence. So I quite like to see the meat. I mean, the question is, did you ever accept money from the Russian government? Did the Russian government ever offer you money in any which roundabout kind of way to help you fund the Leave campaign?
Is that the key question?
Absolutely. And it's absolutely right. At the moment what we know is he had more meetings than he led on, so he sort of downplayed them.
And no suggestion at the moment that Russian funds ever went towards the Leave campaign? No,
but I think the question I think people want answered is, well, did Mr. Banks profit from these meetings, these relationships, these discussions of business deals, shares in gold mines? Did that happen? And did he make money out of it? And did he use that money to fund his campaigns? Now, if he didn't, and all this is just a group of meetings and nothing more than that, then that's fine. But I think, given the prominent role he played and has played in British public life, not as a politician, but as a wealthy funder for the last few years, I think we've got the right to answer these questions.
Julia, this will inevitably be used by some people to say the result of the referendum is somehow suspect.
Yes, well, they'll use every single thing that could possibly be ever claimed. I don't think it's got anything to do with the result of the referendum. This wasn't the official campaign. There's no evidence, as you say, that any of this money was used or was done deliberately, or that Arron Banks funded the Leave.eu campaign purely because the Russians told him to. Look, millionaire businessman involved in mining who wants to buy some mines in Russia has dealings with Russian government shock. I definitely agree with Damien Collins. There absolutely needs to be an investigation. But I tell you, one of the ways of solving this problem is if we don't allow big donations from anybody, whether they're a company or an individual in this country, £5,000 limit from anybody, give politics back to the people, not allowing this Americanisation of our politics on any side whatsoever. Although I'm very grateful for Arron Banks' money in winning the Leave referendum, helping to win it anyway. But I do think if we've got to take the money out of our politics, and then these sort of things wouldn't have any bearing whatsoever on any outcome of any vote.
Polly, is this really a significant story?
I think it is. I think the idea that global politics, are being influenced by the Russians in any way is very alarming. Did they influence the Trump campaign and the Trump success? Did they influence our referendum result? I think that really matters, and I think people are very shocked at the idea, particularly of anybody colluding with enemy foreign powers. I mean, Theresa May...
We're about to play World Cup in that country.
Theresa May has been very strong about, these are not our friends, she says, and she's quite right. After the Skripal affair, we have to be very clear as to who our friends are and aren't. And unfortunately, Trump himself is crossing that line by saying, well, let's let them back into the G7. I think this is very long. I think Julia's absolutely right about it, raising money in politics. For one man to put 12 million into the Brexit campaign is utterly shocking. And of course it had an effect. People don't spend that kind of money.
Although not as shocking as the Chancellor spending our money, £9 million on that leaflet. But there we are.
You'll get the answers on Tuesday, do you think, that will tell us whether or not there was any Russian influence in the result?
Well, we will get answers. I think what we'd like to have is more evidence as well, because I think this is a really important issue. Russia has a track record of trying to interfere in the politics of other countries, and it does it in a variety of ways, and that's why it's important we understand what level of contact and involvement there was here.
OK, Damien Collins, thanks very much for that. And now Tracy Ullman is back on BBC One with a new satirical show, Tracy Breaks the News, and she's being pretty acerbic about all politicians and the main party leaders. Let's take a quick look at some of her impersonations.
Looking forward to the G7, dear? I mean, I know you're not, but it's polite to ask. No, I am not looking forward to it. Everyone is furious because of Trump's metal tariffs, and I should be on the same side as the Europeans, but it's awkward because of that word.
Oh, Brexit.
Pound in the box.
Maybe we need to do something to create a bit of publicity.
Well, I did plug it on Twitter the other day. You know, some of our lot on there are a bit much. Somebody ought to tell them to tone it down a touch.
How about we announce a really radical new policy, like nationalising the dairy industry?
It's rather Stalinist.
Thanks very much.
It wasn't a compliment, John.
Now, politicians never particularly enjoy being satirised, but Corbyn supporters have been a bit upset about some of the portrayal of him. Fairly or not, Polly, do you think?
Absolutely ridiculous. Politicians making a fuss about satire as old as the hills. Of course, Labour should take it on the chin. It's just part of the cut and thrust of politics. We've had much too little really biting satire. More of it, the better. You know, she attacks both sides. They always do. It's been a British tradition that's been lost recently, so I'd welcome her back.
So the other big news from the end of the week, of course, was the G7 summit in Canada, from which emerged a photograph that you practically couldn't satirise. It does it for itself, as we see Angela Merkel leaning over the table to Donald Trump, who's the look on his face makes it pretty clear he doesn't care whether or not he's being ganged up on by the rest of the G7 leaders. You were there, Tom. Does this accurately describe what happened?
Yeah, this really does. I spent a little bit of time last night on the plane back, on the RF plane back, with the number 10 lot, absolutely exhausted and also, quite frankly, flabbergasted by what Donald Trump had just done. They'd gone out there for 2 days. This scene was breakfast on Saturday morning. The Sherpas, in other words, the officials, had stayed up all night long trying to hammer out just the thinnest bit of text that the 7 leaders could agree on, having had this very fractious Friday and long dinner where they couldn't agree on anything at all. They're all coming to have their little breakfast. That table is the breakfast buffet. The leaders are going up, getting their eggs and bacon off the buffet. The Sherpas run in and say, we think we've got something here. So they sit down then and there, clear the eggs and bacon off the trestle table, and then start to thrash it out. And Trump, you can see the beautiful body language is, I ain't having none of this, folks. They finally agree something totally anodyne to say, at least we've got an agreement, put a fake show to the world. And Donald Trump tweets an hour later saying, do you know what, folks, it's all off. And I have to tell you, the look on the Prime Minister's face when she heard that news was quite extraordinary. She was told that walking up the steps to her RF jet home, and it was one of total... I was peeking out the window. It was one of total and utter disbelief that he'd done that to the rest of these 6 world leaders.
This marks the end of the old world order. I really think it does. I think that Trump's disruption is quite extraordinary, and this photograph will be the one that everybody remembers that says, right, that's when the strong democratic Western countries no longer spoke in unison any longer. It's a tragedy and terrifying.
But that's because they're not acting in a strong way. And then this is the thing, that it's quite clear that Donald Trump, the only people he admires are these... people use this awful phrase, strong men. They mean totalitarian, murderous dictators of the like of Vladimir Putin, you know, the Chinese President Xi Jinping. I mean, the reality is that that's what he admires. That's what he wants to be. He doesn't believe in democratic, liberal values, the post-war consensus, any of that. He doesn't accept any of it. Maybe it's time that the Western European nations, Japan, others, maybe it's time we actually sort of upped our game a little bit and we're a little bit more forceful in the world to actually, push our values and our ideas instead of doing this whole sort of guilt over empire and all that nonsense.
Well, it would be a time for greater unity. It is no time to be leaving Europe, just as Europe should be acting together.
Our ideas are a world order. They are a rules-based international system. And just because we don't scream and shout and throw our toys out the table every 5 minutes every summer, I don't think we should be following Donald Trump's lead at all.
No, not screaming and shouting at all. No, absolutely not. But being more forceful about those values and standing up. And again, if countries like, it's all very well Angela Merkel, she wants America to act on. I don't support Donald Trump on any of these issues at all. But the reality is that things like NATO, put up your 2% of GDP for the military and stop expecting American taxpayers to fund your military protection from Russia. I mean, there are issues here on which he is correct. But yeah, this is. Well, I agree with you. I think this is a massive change in the world order.
Interrupt you here, so we've got a picture of the same scene from the other point of view. So you can see the look on Donald Trump's face there, which probably tells you about as much as you need to know, but also the way pictures have been used for this summit's interesting.
That was absolutely fascinating. So this picture was tweeted out by Sarah Sanders, who's Donald Trump's press secretary, and the last picture you just saw was tweeted out by Angela Merkel on her Instagram account. So what happened this summit, it was absolutely the battle of the images. The night before, Friday night, Emmanuel Macron tweeted out a picture himself of the leaders sitting around on a sofa after dinner having a big row with him in the middle, looking like he's the pivotal figure. So it is absolutely... By the way, the footnote is Number 10 tweeted out not a single thing about anything, so they're way off the game. But it's all about controlling the image, who looks like the pivotal figure, who looks like the strutting world leader. And
Summit by Instagram.
We've got the back of Teresa's head at least.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you, all three of you, very much for coming in.